Hello, my name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions.
And I'm Proven Paradox, a guy with a lot of questions.
And you're listening to Bright on Buddhism, a podcast where we discuss East Asian Buddhism, answering listener-submitted questions from listeners just like you, and introducing concepts of Buddhism that you may or may not be familiar with in a casual, conversational setting. Enjoy.
Here, I have been thinking on the moral precepts. We have discussed the first, nonviolence, in great detail already. The second, though, do not take what is not given. I think there is more to say about this one. It's a very precise wording here.
Yes, indeed. The Buddha does prohibit us from taking what is not given. However, by that simple exhortation, he addresses myriad potential situations that one could find themselves in, including those that cannot definitively be called theft.
Fascinating. Do you have an example?
Yes. For example, this precept against taking what is not given covers gambling. When one wins at gambling, they are accepting money which was not given to them for goods or services rendered, or for charity purposes. Instead, it was won by random chance. Thus, it was not given. There is no giver, but there is a taker.
I see. I can also imagine many other situations this might apply to, such as forgeries, scavenging, misrepresenting one's identity, and the like.
Indeed. That is the depth of the precept's wording. It is very far-reaching, and yet still quite simple.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Bright on Buddhism. This week, we will be discussing the second moral precept of Buddhism. What is the second moral precept of Buddhism? What is its significance? How have interpretations of it changed over time? We hope you enjoy, so let's get into it. What is the second moral precept of Buddhism?
The most simple formulation of the second moral precept is to refrain from or abstain from taking what is not given. In other words, it is a prohibition against theft of all kinds. This precept includes our everyday image of petty thievery, such as taking money or items that don't belong to us, but it also includes various kinds of fraud, forgery, and cheating that reflect an intention to take possession of something that belongs to somebody else. The stolen item does not have to be something concrete, such as money or goods. It can also be abstract things. For example, cheating on a test falls under the purview of this moral precept. You are still stealing points or success, or whatever cheating on a test gets you if you get away with it. This kind of forgery or cheating also falls under the purview of the precept against lying or speaking falsely, which is interesting because it shows how certain actions can be two or more kinds of moral violations at one time. Also covered by this precept sometimes is gambling. This is interesting because you are taking something when you win at gambling, but that something was not stolen without consent. It was obtained via a game of chance. However, note the language of the precept. Do not take what is not given. That means that even if you did not take something from somebody else, you can still get in trouble because you took that which was not given to you freely as a form of donation or gifting or payment for services or goods. People who work in gambling and who market or peddle for a living also happen to fall under the purview of this precept. This connects to the right livelihood aspect of the Eightfold Path. Even if a casino worker does not gamble in their lives, they are still breaking the precept for being in the industry. Similarly, peddlers and marketers' job is to try to sell people stuff that they often don't need. This originates in an ancient time, but if we were to look at it in our modern context, we would see that it covers an enormous number of people. The casino industry is a $226 billion industry across the world. Marketing and advertising is an estimated $890 billion industry. Of course, not all marketers and advertisers sell stuff that people don't need, but the point in bringing up the size of the industry is to draw a relationship between this moral precept and some of the largest industries in the world, between this precept and global consumerism writ large.
What is the second moral precept's significance?
This precept, like the other 4 of the major 5 precepts or the other 9 of the 10 precepts, comes up a lot in texts, sermons, and more. Just like the first moral precept, this is part of the earliest strata of Buddhist teaching. This precept is one of the 5 earliest, simplest, and easiest presentations of what Buddhism calls on its disciples to do or how it calls on them to behave. Unlike other precepts, this one is relatively straightforward thanks to the language used. It does not say, don't steal, because while that seems simple, it actually introduces some unexpected ambiguity. Winning money gambling is not stealing, for example. Stealing also has all sorts of moral uncertainty around it, especially in the modern age. For example, by modern Western people's moral standards outside of Buddhism, is it immoral to steal baby formula when one can't afford to pay for it? Is it immoral for a starving person to steal food for themselves? In my opinion, absolutely not. The context is lost in the grand scale of the rule or the declaration, do not steal. However, by the second precept in Buddhism and its wording specifically being, do not take what is not given, a lot of that uncertainty goes away, and we have a clearer path forward. On the one hand, theft of all kinds is covered, because this wording covers taking stuff that isn't offered up to you, but on the other hand, gambling, forgery, and cheating are also covered, because you're prohibited from accepting something that another person did not expressly intend to give to you. Speaking candidly, this moral precept is ultimately less emphasized and less important than the first one, ahimsa or nonviolence. It's still highly emphasized and very important, but there just isn't nearly as much discussion, exegesis, or commentary on it in the texts or among different Buddhist movements. They mostly all agree that taking what is not given is morally wrong. There's not enough ambiguity in the wording and not enough explanation or discussion of it in the sutras to merit a great deal of debate about it. Where it finds some interesting discussion is when we apply our modern Western lens onto it. That is something we normally don't want to do whenever we're dealing with Buddhism and its doctrines and teachings, but it really does work here for the purposes of this discussion. Our modern Western moral system is generally utilitarian, generally Christian-based or Christian-adjacent, and it generally holds that ends justify means in many cases. As such, it encourages sympathy for those in need, and it encourages carrying moral principles, but interrogating them or adapting them to particular situations. Just like in the example I mentioned earlier, the poor person stealing food or baby formula is regarded as not committing a moral violation, or at least committing a smaller moral violation than the alternative. They may be committing a legal violation, but that's separate from a moral one. According to this precept, as it is held through most of its history, that person who steals food or baby formula because they can't afford it is committing a moral violation regardless of the context. Stealing food, whether you have enough of it or none of it, is still taking what is not given, and so the issue is rather black and white. Although the issue is black and white, and although it may seem that context doesn't matter, we should remember that there are still levels of moral violations in Buddhism. Stealing a penny from a rich man is not as big or significant of a transgression as stealing medicine from a sick person, or something similar. So, while stealing is a sin in all cases, it may not accrue the same amount of bad karma in each case.
How have interpretations of it changed over time?
Like with most moral exhortations in Buddhism, it was regarded in a very absolutist fashion in the early stages of Buddhism's history. Then Mahayana came around and challenged that absolutism, and now modern Western ways of thinking muddy the waters even further. In early Buddhism, it was very cut and dry, as we've said. Taking what is not given is a moral violation and should be avoided if somebody intends to pursue the Buddha's Dharma. When Mahayana comes around, the Bodhisattva path appears as the more significant and favorable path to follow, and compassion for all sentient beings begins to outweigh the moral exhortations of earlier Buddhism. In this system, context does start to matter more, and a starving person stealing food is not seen as committing a moral violation. Sympathy and pity for that person's situation means that we should try to help them rather than punish them for crimes of necessity. Modern Western, quote-unquote, secular morality supports this as well. Both Western morality and the Bodhisattva path encourage sympathy, charity, and support rather than writing somebody off as a sinner and moving on. Since this precept covers theft, gambling, cheating, and forgery, it is also interesting to think about a number of ambiguous cases, including kleptomania, gambling addiction, charging interest on loans, and serial con man behavior. Let's begin with kleptomania. This is an addiction to the thrill or the adrenaline rush of stealing, and it leads to serial shoplifting, even of stuff that the person doesn't need or want. I have a distant relative who is a mild kleptomaniac, and she has been known to stuff her purse with silverware and salt shakers from restaurants. As I understand it, kleptomania's addictive draw comes mainly from the thrill of getting away with the theft. It becomes an outlet for moral defiance, or for some exciting amount of deviance that breaks up the rhythm of a regular humdrum life. Another similar addiction is an addiction to gambling. Gambling also elicits a thrill or adrenaline rush, especially when you win, and this sensation can become addictive. There's not always the thrill of breaking the rules, but I think that is a factor sometimes. There is the aspect of obtaining potentially large amounts of money without working to earn it in a way that we are internalized to feel is the correct, quote-unquote, way to earn money. Either way, gambling can become addictive. As it happens, Buddhism has some things to say about addiction. In Buddhism, addiction is the result of strong and continued desire for a pleasant sensation or the lack of an unpleasant sensation, to the point where our thought patterns, feelings, and self-narratives become diluted and reinforce the addiction. Kleptomania is a perfect example of how the moral precepts play directly into the 5 aggregates scheme of understanding existence and cognition, for better or worse. For more on the 5 aggregates, see episode 37, What are the 5 aggregates? Link in the show notes. Now we can mention serial conning and charging interest on loans. Serial conning and grifting can be an addiction like gambling or kleptomania, but it can also have an aspect of getting back at the world for not giving you some deserved level of comfort or respect. Some con people do it because they have this deep misanthropic streak that causes them to ask, if I don't deserve X, why should anybody else have it and not me? There are also con artists who justify their actions by claiming, you would do this to me too if you had the chance. This plays directly into the 3 poisons, which are greed, hate, and ignorance. To examine conning through a Buddhist lens, it is greed because it's driven by a persistent desire to accrue as much wealth as possible. It's hate because it involves hatred of other people. And it is ignorance because it is self-oriented thinking from top to bottom. Con people and grifters can often be narcissistic as well, and so their delusions about a self that can possess wealth and that deserve it more than somebody else can run very deep. The last thing I want to discuss is charging interest on loans. This may seem like an outlier compared to the rest of the phenomena that I've been talking about, but it fits in nicely here because almost all axial age thinkers have commented on it. For reference, the axial age is the age from the 900s BCE to the 400s BCE, and it's a descriptor that scholars apply to this time period because we see some of the first historical prophets and philosophers across the globe in this age. We have the Buddha, we have Lao Tzu and Confucius, we have the transition into the Second Temple period in Judaism, we have the foundation of the very first monotheistic religion, Zoroastrianism, by Zoroaster, and we have Plato in Greece, all in a very tight time frame. Many of these thinkers, including the Buddha and later thinkers like Jesus and more, said that charging interest on loans is immoral and should not ever be done. For the Buddha, charging interest on loans falls under the purview of the second moral precept. One should be so compassionate and so non-attached to their money as to allow it to be borrowed without any expectation of extra recompense simply for the act of doing so. If we follow this line of thinking, we may ask, isn't a currency-based economy all taking what is not given? For example, when we buy something from somebody, we don't give away the money because we want to. We give it because that is the price of having the thing we're buying. Aren't all transactions where some sort of equal value is enforced on the participants going to break the second moral precept? Similar questions can be asked about taxation. The laws that enforce the payment of taxes can potentially be seen as theft on the part of the government, even if it is understood as an even transaction for goods and services rendered. However, I want to emphasize that Buddhism does not view currency-based economies, transactions, and taxation as violating the second moral precept. The reason why comes right back down to the language of the precept. If you were to walk into a store and take something without paying for it, you are breaking the second moral precept. The store is not breaking it by forcing you to pay for it. Abstaining from taking what is not given does not immediately imply that anybody has to give you whatever you want. You have to offer money to facilitate the store wanting to give you the thing that you are trying to buy. Similarly, not paying taxes is considered theft in Buddhism, and not the other way around. The reason why is that no matter whether the services that the government provides are good or bad, people make use of them when they live in a place. In ancient times, not everybody had to pay taxes, but that was only because they had extricated themselves from the purview of the state. For example, mountain ascetics in India did not pay taxes, but that was because they were not under the protection or the support of the government. They also provided a religious and spiritual service to the community because their work was seen to maintain the cosmic order. For more on that, see the Asian Religion series episodes on Hinduism, linked in the show notes. To look at our modern era, anybody who ever uses roads, who is serviced by fire, ambulance, and police assistance, who makes use of schools, who falls under the protection of the military, and who is bound by the laws of the country that protect one in the event of various kinds of crimes, is taking those services and those protections from the service providers. And that stuff is only being given transactionally. It must be bought with taxes. To not pay taxes, thus, is to break the second moral precept.
What about competitions that are not luck-based? Is somebody who takes a cash prize for winning a tournament violating the second precept? What about games that mix skill and luck, such as poker?
These are interesting and valid questions. Taking money for winning a tournament that isn't luck-based is not breaking the second moral precept, as they're explicitly given the winnings for their performance in the competition. A good example is weightlifting. There is not really any luck at all in weightlifting. All other things being equal, weightlifting competitions come down to who can lift the heaviest weights. Theoretically, anybody can train themselves to lift the most weight. As such, the Buddhist moral premise of a weightlifting competition is essentially the organizers saying, I will give you this amount of money if you can lift more than anybody else. In that way, the tournament is fair, the terms are clear, and there is no chance of winning anything that you didn't earn by training. Anybody can meet the conditions of the offer, and none of them meet it randomly. That point is the most important. There is no possibility of randomly meeting the conditions of the money on offer. The winnings are equally within anybody's potential grasp. In other words, there's a clear and straight line that can be drawn between intending to win the competition and winning it. The results are, to a certain extent, well within the control of the participants, if we hold genetics, physical disabilities, injuries, and other potential confounding variables to the side. Of course, in the example of weightlifting, steroids would be a violation of the second moral precept because you're cheating and falsely inflating your ability to lift weight. The same holds true for any other performance enhancers in any other activities. Games, sports, or activities that introduce any amount of luck introduce the possibility of randomly or unintentionally winning the competition, and thus they break the second moral precept. Although we in the modern West think of probability as an essentially fair principle in that it applies to all individuals equally, the reason games of chance are immoral in Buddhism is because people who are bad at something can get lucky, and people who are good at something can get unlucky. In that sense, the outcome is not under the control of the participants. You can't train yourself to the point that probability no longer applies to you. From the other side of looking at a game of chance, when you win in such a game, the winner is not being given the winnings for meeting any sort of tangible or controllable conditions. They are taking the winnings because they just so happen to get lucky. This is especially an issue in gambling games because the winnings are also usually paid into by the other players. When you buy into a poker hand, you are not agreeing to give your money away to anybody in particular. You are buying the chance to win everybody else's money, and everybody else also did not offer to give their money to you or to anyone in particular. Thus, when you win at poker, you're taking the money of others without ever really having been offered it directly.
A bit of pushback on that reasoning. Could one not argue that someone who knows the rules of the game is agreeing to give up their money when they join the game? They know what they're getting into when they sit down. That seems like consent to me.
It absolutely is consent to the potential of losing their money. However, the point of this is that the money is not being offered to any individual in particular. The individual who takes home the money could be random. And that's the important point about this second moral precept, is that there must be a giver and a receiver, and whatever the giver is giving, they must have offered it to the receiver. Otherwise, whoever is receiving or taking is taking without being given first. So in a game of chance, anybody who knows what they're doing, they definitely sit down and they sign up for the chance to lose all of their money, but also to potentially win it all back. They don't sign up to offer it or give it to X player or Y player. It's a whole matter of consenting to give the thing or the money away to somebody in particular. Importantly, stock market trading works this exact same way. The dollar value of a stock is the result of buy-ins from a number of people, and due to conditions outside of any individual's control, that dollar value can rise or fall. When it does, you take money that isn't your own. In the conventional sense, you're selling the asset for whatever amount of money the person on the other end is buying it for, but that dollar value only goes up when other people buy in. So, the buy-in people are all collectively subsidizing the price difference you're benefiting from. Again, in that situation, nobody agreed or offered to give their money to the stock seller. If enough people sell a stock, the dollar value goes down, and whoever bought in simply loses that money. Again, nobody agreed to give that money to any particular or individual stock seller. The stock simply changed in value due to a complicated enough series of events that it really could be called random chance, and somebody just so happened to benefit from that at everyone else's expense. In that situation, they are by definition taking something that is not given.
We hope you enjoyed this week's discussion of the second moral precept of Buddhism. Join us next week, where we will be discussing the historical Buddhist emperor Ashoka the Great. Who was Ashoka the Great? What was his relationship to Buddhism? How ought we understand his effect on Buddhism as a whole? We hope to see you there. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
If you like our show and want to support us financially, we ask that you send that generosity to people in need. For now, we recommend you support World Central Kitchen, an organization that works to feed communities in times of crisis. Right now, they are active in many areas, supporting people in the path of wildfires in America, in the wake of the earthquake in Afghanistan, Ukrainians fighting off foreign occupiers, and relieving the weaponized famine happening in Gaza. If you have the means, please join us in supporting their good work.
My name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions and the voice of Hearer.
And I'm Docs, editor, question asker, and voice of Hermit.
And this has been Bright on Buddhism. Thank you for listening. If you like our podcast, or if you have any questions that you'd like us to discuss, we'd love to hear from you. Please consider leaving a comment, review, or subscribing. You can also reach us by email at bright.on.buddhism@gmail.com. As always, citations and resources for this episode can be found in the show notes. Thank you.